Buenas noches, mi nombre es Raquel Salas Rivera y hoy estaré moderando la discusión sobre la increíble película que acaban de ver, Landfill. La primera vez que dialogué con la directora Cecilia fue mediante un mensaje de correo electrónico, en el cual Cecilia expresó su aprecio por mi trabajo y a cambio compartió Landfall conmigo, con la misma generosidad con la cual lleva a cabo sus entrevistas y colaboraciones. Cecilia se acerca a su proyecto
has structured her
moderando la discusión sobre la
work
increíble película que acaban de ver, Landfill. La primera vez que dialogué con... Hola.
Perdón, estaba como confundida.
Voy a empezar de nuevo porque...
Vamos a empezar de nuevo, arrancamos de nuevo.
No, it's good both.
Let's just start over again. We can...
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Empiezo de nuevo.
Bueno,
so we'll
mi nombre es Raquel Salas Rivera y hoy estaré moderando la discusión sobre la increíble película que Landfall. La primera vez que dialogué con la directora Cecilia fue mediante un mensaje
I spoke to the director Cecilia was through a message, an email message.
Un segundito.
Just one second, please.
Can you hear us?
Angelique, can you hear us?
Dominic has to mute himself. Can we please get Dominic to mute himself?
Mira qué crical. Mira, Landfall se hizo de esta forma, así que ya son un proceso de creación que la película.
Process, just like the film.
Ay, okay, de nuevo.
Okay, let's go again.
Okay. Buenas noches, mi nombre es Raquel Salas Rivera. Estaré moderando la discusión sobre la increíble película que acabo de ver, Landfall. La primera vez que dialogué con la directora Cecilia fue mediante un mensaje de correo electrónico, en el cual Cecilia expresó su aprecio por mi trabajo y a cambio compartió Landfall conmigo, con la misma generosidad con la cual lleva a cabo sus entrevistas y colaboraciones. Cecilia se acerca a sus proyectos con ternura política. En una entrevista reciente con Filmmakers magazine, Cecilia expresó
in a recent interview with Filmmaker magazine, Cecilia
como una guía para
expressed that Landfall is supposed to be a guide
Inmediatamente
for our
pensé en
times.
aquella pregunta de
Immediately I thought about that
a
question
nivel
around
individual
Franz
con
Fanon's
relación
post
a
at
los
an
derechos
individual level
humanos.
in
¿Qué es el
relation to
fascismo
human
sino el
rights. What is
colonialismo cuando
fascism
no
if not
está
colonialism
arraigado en una
when it's
colonia
not
tradicional?
rooted in a colonial,
Claro,
in a
debemos también
traditional colony?
la pregunta.
Of course, we
¿Qué
have
es el
to
colonialismo?
invert that question.
Sino
What is
una forma
colonialism
originaria, un modelo para
if
el
not an
fascismo.
originary
Esto es lo que
model
Landfall
for
graba,
fascism?
el
This is what
carácter
Landfall
totalitario,
captures, which is a
despiadado y
totalitarian
cruel del
character,
colonialismo.
despicable
¿Cómo
character of
continuamos siendo
colonialism.
terreno
How do we
fértil
continue
para los
being
proyectos
a
más
fertile
descabellados
country
de
for
los
the most
inversionistas y
insane
las formas en que
projects
nuestra
for
invisibilización
investors, and the
facilita
way that
la
our civilization
hipervisibilización
facilitates
estratégica de nuestra
the
miseria
militarization
para beneficio
or
de
the movement of our
criptocapitalistas,
mystery, the
agentes de bienes
capitalistic
raíces,
rights,
políticos vendidos
real
y
estate
quien tenga el
agents,
capital
sold out
para
politicians, and
desplazarnos.
whoever has capital to
Lloré
displace
la
us.
primera, segunda y
I
tercera vez
cried
que
the
vi
first, the
Landfall.
second, and
Lloré
third
con la
times
escena
that
que
I
nos
saw
muestra el
Landfall. I
campo lleno de
cried with
botellas
the
de
scene
agua
where they
expiradas
showed the
y
field
que nunca
full
fueron
of expired
distribuidas.
water bottles that were never
Lloré cuando
distributed.
Lale habló de
I
su
cried
gata,
when
que no
Lale
es la
spoke
misma
about
del
her
huracán.
cat, who wasn't the same
Lloré cuando
after the
Armando
hurricane.
Santiago
I
Pintado, tras
cried when
definir
Armando
la ley
Santiago
promesa
painted, tried to
y
define
describir
the
la
promesa
deuda,
law and
explicó
describe
que
the
no
debt.
le
He
gusta Nueva
explained
York,
that he did
que no es
not
su
like New
hogar.
York, that it's
El
not his
hecho
home.
de que pasé
The
tanto tiempo en la
fact
diáspora en
that he
Filadelfia,
spent so much,
que
and I spent so much
participé del
time in the
verano del
diaspora in
19,
Philadelphia,
que la
that I
película incluye tantas caras
participated in the summer of
familiares, algunas que
2019, when the
conozco desde la
film includes so
adolescencia,
many familiar
le dio un
faces, some of which
carácter
I know from my
especial como
youth,
de home
gave it a
movie,
really
pero
special
elevada a
character
nivel 20 de 10
from a home movie,
Tribeca.
but it
Hay
just sort
algo
of
que pasa
put it
cuando uno se
elevated
ve a
into
sí
another
mismo
Tribeca
como
level, right? There's something that
protagonista de
happens
algo
when you
tan
see
hermoso
yourself
y
as a
devastador.
protagonist of something
Algo
so
que nos
beautiful and
recuerda que a pesar
devastating,
de
something that reminds us
cómo se ha
that even
comercializado nuestra
though
belleza,
our
sí
beauty has been
somos bellos,
commercialized,
más bellos que
we are
cualquier
beautiful, more
representación que nos
beautiful than any
ofrezca la mirada
representation
imperial.
that the
En
imperialist
la misma
gaze
entrevista,
can
Cecilia
offer.
también responde lo
The
siguiente:
same interview that
recuerdo que le
Cecilia
enseñé
offers
Landfall a una
responds to the same
amistad
thing. I
cuya
remind
poesía
them
explora la guerra, la
of the
violencia y
friendship
la
that
agresión militar estadounidense. Le
it
dije que me
explores the
preocupaba que
violence,
los
the
espectadores
aggression
sintieran que la
of
poesía era un
military
lujo
aggression,
que
and
Puerto Rico no podía costear.
It sort of explores
Mi
also
amiga
that
me
the cops are a
respondió con
luxury
lo
that
siguiente:
Puerto Rico cannot
solo las
obviate. My
personas
friend
que nunca han
responded that
vivido por una
only the
crisis
people who have not
dirían que
lived
la
through a
poesía
crisis
es un
could
lujo.
say that poetry is a luxury.
Creo que esto es lo que más me
I
gustó de
think that
Landfall
this is what I liked most
y lo que
about
lo
Landfall,
diferencia de la
and
explotación
what makes
artística de
it
la miseria que
different
hemos
from
visto
the
tras el paso
artistic
de María.
exploitation of misery
Esta
that
no
we've
es una
seen
obra sin
after
poesía.
Maria hit us.
Con
This is
eso quiero
not
decir, esta no es
a
una
work
obra sobre las
without poetry.
condiciones
This is
más
not
básicas
a
de la
work
supervivencia,
about
un ay
the
bendito
most
donde no tenemos agencia
simple survival
política,
conditions.
sino
This is
una
not
obra sobre cómo
a history
creamos nuestra
or a story
realidad.
about feeling sorry
La
about how
palabra
we lack
poesía viene de poesis,
survival
del griego
skills.
antiguo. Se traduce más o
Poetry,
menos
the
como
word comes
la
from
actividad que trae la
ancient Greek, and it
existencia
sort of translates
lo que
itself to
antes
the
no existía.
activity that brings into
Toda forma de
existence something that
creación,
didn't exist
sea o no
before.
sea
All
considerada
forms of
artística,
creation, whether they're considered
toda la
artistic
creación
or
humana
not,
es
all
poesis.
human creation is
Sobrevivimos, a
poesis.
diferencia
We
de muchos otros
survive
animales, no todos, al
as different
crear
other
nuestro
animals, not all
mundo.
of them. We
Si lo vemos
survive
de este
by
modo, la
creating our
creación es
world. We
fundamental
see
para
it
la
this way
supervivencia.
as a fundamental
Es
path
solo en un mundo
of
capitalista,
survival.
maniqueo y
It's fundamental skill
colonial
for
que la
survival.
noción de la
It is
supervivencia
this
se torna
gerrymandering
en algo
colonialism that
utilitario y
turns it into something
empobrecido.
utilitarian and
Eso lo
something
sabemos quienes
impoverished.
vivimos María,
This is
el
something
verano
that
del
we
19
know
y la lucha
that we've lived
política
through
en Puerto
Maria,
Rico,
the summer of
porque hemos tenido que
2019, and the
crear
political
para
struggle of
sobrevivir.
Puerto Rico, because we've had to create
Les
in order to
recuerdo a los que
survive.
se están
So I
uniendo
want
ahora
to
mismo
remind
que
folks who
existen
are
dos
joining
sesiones
right
de
now that there
preguntas,
are
una en
2
español
Q&A
y
sessions.
una en
One is in
inglés, y las
Spanish, one
pueden
is in
acceder
English, and
mediante
you
la
can access
página
those
del Latino
through
Film Festival. I remind those of you who are joining us right now that there are two Q&A sessions, one in
two Q&A
Spanish
sessions.
and one in English. You can access both through the Philly Latino Film Festival page. También puedes ver y participar mediante el Facebook Live.
You can also watch and
Después de la
participate through
sesión,
a Facebook
Tocalale
Live.
estará
After the
tocando un
session,
DJ set,
Tocalale will
así que
be
no se
playing a
vayan.
DJ set, so don't leave.
Y
So
me
make
honra
sure to not
moderar
leave, and
esta
I am very
sesión.
humbled to moderate
Voy
this
a darle una
session. I'm
bienvenida
going
bien
to
breve a los
welcome briefly
participantes
all
para que
participants
conozcan más o menos quiénes
so
son.
that they can know who
René
they
Reyes
are.
Medina,
René Reyes
Luis Lucho Bonet
Medina, Luis
Cuello,
Lucho Bonet
ambos son
Cuello. They're both
protagonistas y
protagonists
aparecen en la película.
and appear in the film.
Lale Pastor también sale en la
Lambra
película,
Pastor
pero
also
también es la
shows up in the movie,
productora.
but is also the producer of
Angélica
the film.
Negrón, que
Angélica
trabajó con el
Negron,
arreglo
who
musical,
worked
y
in the
Cecilia
scoring of the
Aldarondo,
film,
la
and Cecilia
directora.
Aldarondo, who is the director.
Pueden leer un poquito más
You
sobre
can
cada
read a
uno de
little
los
bit more
participantes en la
about each of
página
these
del evento.
participants and the page of the event.
Y ahora voy a comenzar
So
con la
right
sesión
now,
de
I'm going to
preguntas.
start with the Q&A
Los que
session.
quieran
Those
hacer preguntas
who
pueden
want to
hacerlo
make any
mediante el
questions,
chat
you can do
y
it
se
in the chat,
incorporarán en la
and
medida
they
que
will
se
be
puedan a la
incorporated
discusión.
as best as they can into the discussion.
Quería empezar con una
So I
pregunta
wanted to
general.
start with a general question.
¿Podrían cada uno de ustedes hablar un poco
Could each
sobre
of
cómo
you
conocieron?
speak a little bit about how you met Cecilia and how you started your collaborations for Landfall? Whoever wants to go first. Hi. Okay, good evening, Reina Reyes.
Cecilia and Landfall was introduced to me by Lale Namerov. We were being invited to talk about our experience during this entire process after the hurricane, where each of us had different anecdotes of our survival, as well as our nearby communities. And in that context is that I met Cecilia and the wonderful production that she was doing with Lala Pastor and everybody else. Hello. Well, same. I met Cecilia and the project through Lale. As Renee was explaining, we were all going through a process of understanding everything that was happening. So one day Lale commented about the project that she was collaborating with Cecilia. And it was a very strange moment because we were all, and we're still, but we were all emotionally going through many situations. But it was also an opportunity, an excellent opportunity to be able to organize a little bit the information inside our heads. And that's the way that I connected with Cecilia and with this production that it's doing, it's being a success, and it's very important for all of us. And how was it to work with Cecilia? Was it difficult? Boring? No, no, not at all. For me, was an excellent experience to find people that I hadn't seen before even before the hurricane. Some people that are, colleagues in the struggle. I remember that some people came through to that recording, and it was good to see and talk to those people beyond what was recorded, that we can speak to each other face to face. Something that right now is we're missing very much. So it was something very. Lale, this question is a little bit for Lale and Cecilia. How did this start? How did all of this start, this entire project? Well, we have like a fun how mirrors, and it becomes like a crazy thing. Well, we met through a great intellectual named Yarimar Bonilla, which was writing about the crisis. I read an article that she wrote in the Washington Post, because I live in New York my entire life. I have lived in the diaspora, and I read an article that the title was, "Why would anyone want a hurricane? Because somebody will get rich or wants to get rich." That's the first time I had seen that angle in the entire coverage that was being done about Maria, because there was a lot of talk about the hurricane, but there was not a talk about the economical aspect of the debt and the economical crisis. And that bothered me a lot. So without knowing her, I wrote her, and that's how we met. And we started dialoguing, and we started this project. I wrote her to see if she knew somebody and through those connections with various degrees of connection, I was able to meet Lale, and we met and had a coffee, and we asked each other a few questions, and we realized quickly that we were both in pain, but in different ways. Me from here, my grandmother passed away after Maria. Lale, do you want to come in? Because I don't want to describe your pain. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna first say that I'm very emotional to work with you, because we're very emotional beings, so we are very vulnerable. So I liked working with you. And yes, I had one meeting scheduled with Cecilia, thanks to a colleague and friend, Grace, who contacted me. She said, somebody contacted me, I don't know anything about films, I'm going to send you the contact. So I had the opportunity to have a coffee with Cecilia. And in that meeting, we took our hearts on a walk, and we talked about our grief and how we were feeling. And it was a very tense conversation between a Puerto Rican of the diaspora and a Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico. And there was a tension of trust or lack of trust, mainly from my part. And I think in that moment of tension, what she answered to me was, when are you gonna have trust? We're already here. So for me, that was a very important switch. Oh, she's she's in my face. She's like, she's facing me. So we started talking, and I said that I stopped film school because I was no longer interested in studying in film. And she asked me if I was interested in collaborating with her in different ways, especially to look for archives. And between the conversation of that, it was going to be half an hour we were talking for an hour and a half about history, about what was going on, about this, we had Operation Bootstrap, a whole historical lens of Puerto Rico. Then after that we were inseparable. We couldn't stop talking. And I want to emphasize that the collaboration and the tension was very important and very key. And it ended up being a very important part of the film because it was a conversation between, well, it was a subtle, but it was a conversation between Lale and I, but it's a way that somebody from the diaspora tried to understand. I feel that this process has been, for me, a learning process of political education, of awakening for me. I also want to recognize Angelica because I know Angelica for much more longer. And I want to say that I met her because she made the music for my first long documentary. I love working with Angelica, and she's one of the best or greatest Puerto Rican artists that I know. Thank you. I was going to ask you, it's very interesting because there's a lot of play between music and silence, and I was wondering how was your process? How was your process in relationship to the film, and how much dialogue, how much conversation did you have with Cecilia about where to put the music, etc.? Well, really, what I remember the most was at the beginning. We spoke about the idea that it was very important that Puerto Rico was the main character and that was highlighted with the music. I remember sat down and conceptually thinking, I have the instrument and everything, and I sent some demos to Cecilia. She said, "That's beautiful, but that's not this noises that's not the sounds of Puerto Rico." So then I went again to the drawing board, and it was really interesting because, and maybe there's a fly around here. It's driving me crazy. But I think it's something that comes when you work a lot of film music. Directors that don't value music and don't have the trust that someone like Cecilia gives me. Every time I work with her, she says, "Art what you want. It can be the most experimental thing, but if it works, it's good." So I was thinking something traditional and trying to do something that she would like, but I forgot that I worked with her 3 years ago for Memories of a Crimson Heart, and it was a little bit more open with Cecilia, so we did something very experimental in the sense that I've never worked in this way. But usually I do the music, I record it, and that's the process. Here we record it and compose with those recordings. I knew that I wanted to record in Puerto Rico, that I wanted to work with Puerto Rican musicians. We recorded about 2 violins, a viola, a harp, and I also added electronics, but the process was playing with the musicians. There were pieces that there were partitures that were written, but the majority of the recording session that was 2 days long is how do the birds sound? How do the night evening in Puerto Rico sound? How does rain sound? How does we're going to do the arc of the violin, so to make sure that we can get something similar to create the sonoric palette, and to do that made more sense to work in that way. But I love that thing that you said, Raquel, about the spaces. With all the work that I've done, is the least music that it has, but I think it's super effective because when there's music, when there's no music, you feel the musicality of the country and the nature. And what I want people to take away with the music is that when they listen to something that is with intention, that comes with a artistic proposal, that complements the the sound beauty that already exists in this country. I also wanted to add that in many documentaries, they use music in a way that is not manipulating, but to bring out emotion. But in documentaries, is really like a backseat. The music is just there to like be a filler and help when something's missing and add a little bit of emotions. And I worked with a great editor, Canadian. Her name is Sarah Long, that was also key for this process because she has also a capacity of patience, a great patience, and doesn't like cutting everything. And for example, the piece of music with the crabs, the when the lobsters come out, that scene. Usually, we do the music, we compose the music. You compose the picture, but what we did is the opposite. Angelica had already it's some music that yeah, that was music that I wrote a few years ago. That wasn't for the film, but you had it in mind. And I loved that music, and we started using it, and we didn't have where to put the music. And we ended up putting that scene to be use that music. And I love it because it gives the music is so the one that like rules, like the one that commands in that moment. In that moment, it's a very important moment as part of the collaboration. I wanted to do a question that maybe is more general about the relationship between memory and the film as a certain type of record. I don't know if Cecilia has mentioned in certain moments to incorporate a lot of material and that is archival, and you work with Lale. And it's also interesting because you're mentioning that the gathering or the encounter between activists and friends, it was an opportunity to reflect
It was
about
an
what had
opportunity to
happened
reflect about
in
what's
Maria.
happening after Maria. And in reality, it's something that I've heard before. There hasn't been a lot of time to reflect between catastrophes in Puerto Rico. Other politicians call it, or natural catastrophes or political catastrophes. So I wanted to ask a question about how do you see or have seen not only the conversations within the film, but conversations outside of the film that are very similar to those conversations, maybe as ways to process trauma, or if you've seen that has been processed in very different ways in Puerto Rico, or what are those ways to process or trauma in relation to memory and to the creation of memory, even if it's just oral history, oral memory, even if it's just collective history in the space, in a space of struggle. Well, I can jump in, but you are kind of quiet. I'll start. Well, I have always been fascinated about memory and the topic of memory, and that's always been present in my work. But part of what I felt when I started collaborating with Lale was that there was an issue, a very important issue, a political issue around the fact that a lot of folks didn't want to remember what had happened. This whole thing about palantismo, moving forward, something that Lale eloquently criticizes in the film. They mentioned that there are things that you do have to come back to. You do have to come back to that moment. And I'm very conscious up to this day, July 25th. I'm watching this week all of the memories that are showing up in the threads and the social media. Like a year ago, we kicked out the governor. A year ago, there was perreo on the streets. Where are we now? And for me, it was so important to link the personal to the political. I understand that, I understand the reason why it's highly dangerous sometimes to open open that box, you know? But at the same time, I feel that, when Lale had spoken to us in their interview about palantismo, about being palante, about moving forward so fast, there is a role in there. That moment was important, and it was placed there for a reason, for a very important reason. Do you feel that it still takes a lot out of you to speak about what happened? For me, it's really hard still to have moments where I rethink, the last 4 or 5 years that we've been living in this archipelago. And I think that thinking about strategies and healing strategies, my personal one has been this process of the shooting, and what has been the process of El Hangar in Santurce, which has been a community process where we've been opening ourselves up and finding ways to respond. But I think we've been putting out fires for about 5 years. We're very drained. We're very tired. And remembering is necessary, but it definitely becomes difficult for sure. But we heal collectively. And it's, at this point in the pandemic, it's become really difficult to do. For me, when this project began, I am, I'm one to think about, there wasn't time to really process what happened in the hurricane for many reasons, because of survival, for meeting our needs, for grieving, missing the people that weren't there anymore. And yeah, it was a hard process, a little bit like going back in time, at that time it hadn't been that long as now, but yeah, we all suffered during that time. So it was really hard. But personally, for me, it was a very unique opportunity, during this time to sort of organize my emotions around what had happened, what was still going on, and what is still going on. And I'm just gonna say this, like it was also sort of like channeling rage. We had spent so much time disconnected from social media because we had no power. There wasn't access to any other places because we lost our folks. So I knew that I had a lot of intense emotions. And this process around the conversations and the interviews with Cecilia and the team and Lale, they kind of helped to clarify a little bit of what was going on. And also I saw it as a chance to expose a reality that wasn't really being shown in social media. Months later, there were folks from other countries who I would tell them things and they were like, oh, I never saw this. I never saw this. So this project, I feel that it's started kind of like is and was necessary to share a reality that we all lived in the islands. So yeah, I feel like memory is hard sometimes to go there, but I do understand that it's really necessary. And as some mentioned over here, we're still going on this project. This process hasn't ended. Maria has happened, and like 20 other things have happened. So I feel like this is like a model that we can follow to keep moving forward with what's happening right now on the islands. I want to ask a question that Ashley Perez Garcia sent that I think is really interesting, that it says, how was the process of filming and interacting with crypto colonizers, crypto capitalists, crypto bros, however you want to call it? Well, I think I'm the one who was the only one who wasn't there in that moment. Paulo, the one who recorded a lot, or filmed a lot of the film, has the more personal experience that I also have. But I am not a journalist. I am not an investigator. And but when I read an article about the New York Times, about them, and I found out about them, and I found out that they had a conference, I said, we have to go in there. We have to understand what they're doing. And how they keep doing what they're doing, and they keep going behind this mystery. Like, you know, it's crazy. It's crazy because these people sort of present themselves kind of like hippies and kind of like anti everything, but they're hyper capitalists. And that is, to a degree, it's, you know, and they behave like, oh, we're here to help. That, you know, that's kind of like their flow, right? And we're here to restart Puerto Rico. We're here to help the economy. We're here for futurism, and everything has to be new. And they don't put on a tie. They dress like they don't know anything. Like, Raquel, I can't hear you. You're on mute. Yeah. Was there any difficulty filming with them? Did they have to give you permission, or? Well, part of this was that we had rights to record what we recorded because we were in public situations. And also the guy with the beard thing, he loves the camera, he loves attention. So I said, hey, we're interested in the economical recuperation of Puerto Rico, and we want to continue. We want to follow what you're doing because we think it's interesting. And I think, you know, that was the best thing to do based on who they were. So, but yeah, that was sort of the aspect of the production that for me it didn't give me any pleasure really to be in that environment. But for me, it was incredibly important. And unfortunately, there's a lot of folks in Puerto Rico with some interests that are doing stuff behind closed doors, you know, and also up, you know, in everyone's face. Okay. You know, I'm thinking right now about the Roosevelt Roads project that was announced. Like, you know, Wanda Vasquez is sort of like breaking ground in Roosevelt Roads, and it's the same dream that Brock had. Brock Pearson, the shorter guy with the thing that shows up in the film. He has the hat, right? So he, you know, it doesn't show up publicly. He doesn't say that it's his project, but all of us are like, oh, this is the same thing. So they're not trustworthy. And we have to, you know, amidst the entire craziness of Puerto Rico, there are people who take advantage of that craziness. And that's what Lucho was saying at dinner, because there's so much chaos. And this is what disaster capitalism is. People that jump in because everyone's trying to survive. There's no time. And as long as everyone's trying to survive, these folks just jump in and take advantage. And it's a very incredibly dangerous ideology because they're presenting themselves as the saviors, as our friends. Y como si no fueran los malos. So, and through technology, that's how they're seducing young folks and people who don't have a sense of their future. Yeah, it's a lot of things to say, but I don't want to take over. But yeah, that's a good chance because you mentioned Luca, and I wanted to ask, how did you imagine a second part of this film from summer 19? Because there's a lot of things that have happened. What are events that could be included in that? The testing, the tests, the thing with the tests. I mean, this is like a musical. The thing with the tests, you know, I feel like this Lublan thing on the gentrification that's happening right now in all of Puerto Rico is absurd. And I think that the whole wave against tourists and American tourists, I think it's also really interesting how we're expressing ourselves towards these tourists. It's really characteristic about what's happening. And we're seeing that on social media. So I want to indicate something for folks who are not in Puerto Rico right now. Maybe they're not following, is that with the pandemic, there's been a lot of dynamics with tourists that are visiting Puerto Rico to party. And, you know, all these things that were already happening in Puerto Rico, it's sort of blowing up with this virus, with people who come to take advantage of the situation and spread the virus. Anyone else? Who else will be in the sequel? Those earthquakes, right? Yeah, in terms of the earthquakes, we would have to talk about the thing with the supplies in the warehouses and how this sequence of earthquakes that started at the end of 2019 in December are still active. And there's a lot of homes in the south part of the island that folks have not been able to go into their homes, or they're in their homes and they live with the daily fear that their house might fall on them. And it's really intense because a lot of folks, some of these folks are close to us, and they're facing the reality that there's a worldwide pandemic on top of their home, might fall on them, on top of the most disastrous hurricane that ever happened in the last 90 years just happened 2 years ago. So yeah, and for me, it's really interesting because when we worked on this project, you felt that there was a blueprint or of something that had just happened, or a model of something that just happened. But now that more time has passed, all of a sudden this question, you can just add like 10 more things to that list. You got the earthquakes, you have like a governor who was never elected, who even after what happened with Ricky Rosselló, there's so many things, that feel. And I was talking to a friend about this morning that, it's right now it's just so hard to talk about this material, about a hurricane themed material, because after the hurricane, so many things have happened, that have been mentioned here already. But that disaster capitalism isn't just happening because of Maria, right? Like, you can feel that disaster capitalism is happening all the time, including right now at this moment in the pandemic, when Cecilia mentioned, the folks who are coming in to like have, their little fun in the sun kind of moment. So there's so many things that you could add to that I feel like Cecilia would have to do like more documentaries to cover all of this information. But I feel, again, back to the commentary that I was making, I feel like through this project and other projects that friends are doing, at least there is an eye set on it, there's a voice to it, to the situation on the island, which is a very critical situation when we talk about it politically, right? And it's also a health crisis, right? So yeah, I would add a lot of things to the list.
And following the topic of that question, I wanted to ask Cecilia, how did the vision of the film change when the protests started? Because originally the film was, they didn't know there was going to be some protests the summer of 2019. A follow-up general question is how do you feel when the protest started? If you expected it, is something that you imagined? So the protest started. We thought that the film was almost done. We were in the fine cut of the film, and the film, before the film ended with the dinner of the people that are here, and there was a moment where the people are, I don't know, it was ended in a very ambivalent way. And when people would see the film to give us feedback, they said that it didn't have any kind of hope, that it was lacking hope. And well, where are we going? And this film also ends in a very ambivalent way, but all of a sudden it started, and I was here editing with Tara, and Lale will call me every 30 minutes. Yeah, this thing came out, the chat came out, and a minute, hour by hour. I think we need to go there. I think we need to document this, and we decided go there, and everything changed because there's a moment where Luis, Lale's friend said, "This is the hurricane that how does he say it? This is the hurricane that we had tucked away in our chest." And it was something because Lale and I talked a lot about why people were not protesting more, or there was no more there were no more resistance. And Lale, at some point, you would tell me you were overwhelmed. Oh, people, what's going on? There's no more. There's no more. There's no more activism. And for me, it was like a delayed reaction because the trauma was so big. But you could tell me why. You could tell me better why it took 2 years. I have my theory, but it's very interesting because this thing happened, this really big thing happened, and 2 years later, wow. That's why I like that line about the hurricane, is because that rage was always there. But I would like for you all to tell me. I think that the rage that you're mentioning, that it was a little bit about what moved the mass of Puerto Ricans against Rosselló. For me, that rage is always there. I think us Puerto Ricans, we have gone through our history with so much aggression and so much injustices that rage is always there. I do feel that for the moment of Ricky's resignation, or the movement for Ricky's resignation, it was a moment where various situations came together that had not been able to be channeled or understand each other. And it was really crazy because I assimilated a little bit with what's happening right now, even though it's different. I related to what's going on right now with COVID. That you have a population that is, locked in lockdown. It's gonna be a moment where it was gonna. We are human beings and we need to move forward. So I feel that moment was a little bit of that explosion. Curiously, needs to continue to happen. Needs to continue to happen, one after the other, because the attack that we're receiving constantly in this island is very heavy, it's very strong. So I feel that in that moment there was a reaction, a chain reaction about other things that had been happening and that we were keeping inside of us. And yeah, I think it's a story that continues to repeat itself with different faces, but it continues to happen. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's important that we remember that we look at it again to so we can continue that flame, because we need it to be able to continue fighting against the injustices that we live here in Puerto Rico. I wanted to mention something along the same lines of Lucho, that there has been a consistent process of small explosions, but the summer of 2019 materializes, but before that there was a lot. There was a May 1st, there's a March 8th event in 2018. There was also a March 8th and also a May 1st in 2018, 2019. And we've had a few years of a lot of activism. If we could say that the summer of 2019 was Ricky resigned, and we're talking in reference to a process that happened just when the warehouse scandals of Governor Wanda Vasquez which we call Wanda Renuncia or Wanda Resign, which was a little bit Ric Flair of the protest at the same time. Well, the same way it happened quickly, it also ended quickly. We're trying to see that the people are trying to respond to all of that with what they have as the continuous disasters happen, because that was the beginning of COVID-19, and there's still a lot of people that have not been able to return to go back to work in the south of the island, and many people also have left. We're fighting while we're also rebuilding our lives and our country and our sustenance. So we're going to talk about the first question that Raquel made about the archive of memory, or the memory archives. We're going to find a lot of we're gonna find like a lot of hills of struggles before summer of 2019. I'm gonna do one last question to close. Thank you everyone for participating. And this question comes from Beth Castle, who is asking, where do you want the film to go now, considering it has come out during COVID and that it was gonna come out? A lot of activities have been postponed, as well as festivals. So how do you visualize how this film is going to circulate? Well, part of this is that I don't have to, all of us, we have all lost things with the situation of the pandemic. We had a lot of plans that we had to change, but an advantage is that we can come and gather in this way, the way that we are right now. Because what we were going to do with the launch of the film, which was going to be in New York in the Tribeca Film Festival, it was going to be different. Yeah, it has advantages, but it's a little bit of a world premiere. And something that we feared was the usually in a documentary like this is to present it in a festival in many places, and many times the community that is key for the film, they see the film afterwards, later. And we didn't want the Puerto Rican audience behind, but we had a plan to bring the film to Puerto Rico this summer in person, do a little tour all around Puerto Rico. And that is still, we have a plan whenever we can do that. But part of what I love is to be able to present this film in to a diverse audience, because we have people in Puerto Rico who are seeing it for the first time, my family, people in New York, people in Orlando, people in Idaho, people everywhere, all over the US are watching this film. And the fact that we are speaking in Spanish and discussing this as centering the Puerto Rican, the Boricua experience, for me is extremely beautiful, among everything else. Continue with digital festival or virtual festival. We're doing that tour, and eventually we're gonna put it on PBS next year and POV, and show that's gonna. This is very grassroots. So what I want to say is that for people that could see the film, if you can follow on social media and continue sharing with people, hey, if you can post this, I saw this film tonight, Landfall documentary, because we're just starting, and especially we have plans to organize an event, a bigger event for the anniversary of Maria in September, which is also going to be virtual, but we want to please, because what we have lost is press and attention that we were going to have, and there's a risk that films that have been finished this year, that they get lost, and we don't want to lose Puerto Rico with that. So it depends a lot of the community, of the people that supports us to spread the word, because without that, we're not gonna be able to continue. Lana, do you want to add anything? I keep asking about the previous question. No, I shouldn't go into that one because I am extremely happy. Thank you, everyone, for saying thank you. And very, what I say is that for me, what happened in 2019 in the summer, the one that renuncia, on May 1st, a caravan throughout the entire island. That politically, what we thought was impossible is being happening, is being made inevitable. Is the moment to act, and we're seeing it. We're acting. We're going through process little by little. If you can access social media, Landfall, hashtag it, you know how it is. So let's do a little bit of noise with it. But don't leave yet because Lale is going to play. And we want to tell everyone, well, thank everyone for participating and all the people that asked questions. We apologize that we couldn't ask all the questions due to the time limits, but we appreciate your patience and maybe we can address them in a different form or in other ways. I also want to thank you all for having patience with the technical problems. We know that all of this is new and these ways of interactions are new, and we have to have a lot of patience one with the other. And thank you for having it. And also, I wanted to ask the Horizon Film Festival, Boricuas. And now we're gonna have a DJ set with Tocalale, so don't leave. Thank you. So get ready, get ready.